Okay, today we're just going to be finishing our video. We're not finishing. We won't be able to finish it. We'll keep watching our video that we started yesterday after the Mayflower. So you're going to be answering the questions on that as well. So make sure, especially you guys who are online, make sure that you're looking at each question before it comes up. So you kind of look ahead at what you need to be looking for and listening for. Because some of them, there's a couple in there. There's a couple that I'm going to pause today just because I want to make sure that you get it, just because it's kind of hard to really see that that was the answer. So only a couple of them I will pause, but other than that, just keep on it and keep listening for what you need to be looking for your answers. So, all right. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started. We're going to start the video from where we ended it yesterday. And just to give a reminder before we start, we have no school on Monday for President's Day. So we will finish this video on Tuesday, and then you will turn that assignment in. So we'll only have a little bit left of the video on Tuesday. Actually, hopefully, we'll have to see where we get today. So, all right, let's find it, and here we go. Just let me know if it's not loud enough. Oh, let me unplug this first. There we go. I had a feeling that wouldn't. All right, let's try this again.
And those two survivors were not just like any two people. They were two people who'd seen everyone they know die miserable, wretched, painful, excruciatingly painful deaths. So it's not only that the population was eviscerated, it's that the survivors were deeply affected by their experiences and vulnerable in ways that are hard for us to imagine. You know, the sort of post-apocalyptic vulnerability.
Massasoit had seen 9 of every 10 of his people perish, of a cause nobody understood. Tiny microbes for which the native population had no natural defense. Alien diseases left behind by European sailors. As the season of death subsided, the Narragansett, largely spared the ravages of the epidemic, began a series of raids on Wampanoag villages, and the beleaguered Wampanoag looked to Massasoit to lead them into an uncertain future. In December of 1620, after 66 days at sea and 5 uneasy weeks on the northern tip of Cape Cod, a scraggly cult from England anchored its sailing vessel, the Mayflower, off the mainland coast, and sent a small party of men to scout the wooded shores.
Get aboard! Show the order. Make some. Better set sail.
Radical religious views had made the Pilgrims unwelcome and unwanted in England. They had no home to go back to if they failed to make one in this new world. Soon after coming ashore, the scout party stumbled onto the Wampanoag village of Patuxet.
Oh, it's death. It's a village. Prior to the 1600s, Patuxet was a large community of, it's estimated, well over 2,000 native people. In 1618, the sickness reduces the population to almost 0. When the English arrived, They find houses fallen to ruin, fields lying fallow, human bones bleaching the sun that had been scattered by animals.
They attributed this devastation to God looking out and clearing the way for his chosen people.
Patuxet had easy access to fresh water, a decent harbor, and high ground from which the pilgrims could defend themselves. They set their lone cannon on a nearby hill and christened the village New Plymouth. The fortifications were hardly sufficient to the task. The Wampanoag, even in their weakened state, could have wiped out the visitors with ease. Instead, Massasoit sent warriors to keep an eye on the strangers.
The pilgrims would report of themselves in the journals that they saw Indians. And of course, when they didn't see them, they thought they saw them because in the time of bush patrols, they were sure there was an Indian behind it. Our people always had to watch. It was part of a survival. You know, you had to watch anyone to observe how they were and to see how they were going to act.
When Indian people see the strangers who have arrived and they brought with them women and children, that makes them different from previous Europeans that they've seen or heard of.
In Wampanoag tradition, if you're thinking about making trouble, you don't bring your women and you don't bring your children. So to see folks showing up with women and children, immediately they're not a threat. Secondly, they're really, really sickly and they're starving.
When the Lord Jesus shall never fail from heaven with his mighty angel, in flaming fire, taking vengeance on them that know not God, that obey not the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. We pray always for you that our God would count your while we are this covenant, and fulfill
The longer the Wampanoag watched, the more pitiful the strangers appeared. 102 pilgrims had made the trip across the Atlantic. Midway through that winter, 15 had died of disease or deprivation. By the end of the winter, the pilgrims had buried 45 of their fellow travelers. 13 of the 18 women had died. But even as their numbers dwindled, it was clear the strangers were not giving up, and anxiety grew among the Wampanoag. While many powerful tribal leaders, or sachems, argued that it was time to finish off the pilgrims before their settlement took hold, Massasoit counseled patience. The final decision on handling the strangers would fall to him. Sachem of the Pokanoket, one of the groups that made up the Wampanoag Confederacy. He had risen to the leadership of all the Wampanoag, earning his title Massasoit.
Massasoit is a classic sort of village chief or super village chief in the Algonquin world. He is a man of great respect among his people. He doesn't have the coercive power that a European sovereign or a monarch would have. He is a person who leads by example, and people have faith in his leadership and his experience.
Throughout that winter, Massasoit wrestled with the question of how to deal with the newcomers. The chief's first impulse had been to put a curse on the pilgrims and watch them die off altogether. But the weakened Wampanoag needed any friends they could get. Massasoit was paying steep tribute to the Narragansett, but he knew his near neighbors had the numbers to overrun the remaining Wampanoag villages whenever they chose. And he was aware that the strangers came from a nation of wealth and military might.
During the winter of 1620-21, Massasoit must have been thinking about the possibilities of some kind of alliance, because the Pilgrims looked pretty manageable. given the fact that 50% of them are dead by the end of the first winter, Massasoit, and this is an assumption that was made by Indians all up and down the coast, would have thought this will be good. I can have these people here. I can get from them the things that I want from Europeans, and I can control them. So they'll be an ally and a benefit to me and my people.
Kisikon kada balanas ni wachiki kisika waniga. Panu papa pinam paandama ini na dusa na wichi. Wana nui ya wache ini ni sinwa.
That's ready enough. In the first days of spring 1621, Massasoit sent a small party into the Pilgrim settlement.
Look at it. Please.
The Wampanoag chief and 60 of his men waited on the far side of a small river. He refused to enter the village himself until the Pilgrims agreed to give up a hostage. The English chose a young man with little to lose. Edward Winslow was a 25-year-old whose wife was just days from death. Winslow agreed to go as the hostage and to deliver Governor John Carver's invitation to Massasoit to enter Plymouth for talks.
Come from King James. He welcomes you with love and peace.
Oh, you know what? You must be walking now.
The King's James, my lord, is his friend and ally.
You know what?
Please, enter our village.
You walk with
Carver,
Go on.
the governor, I'd speak with you. Please, we wish to be at peace with you as our closest neighbours. Please.
Among the men with Massasoit that day was a Wampanoag who could act as translator. Tisquantum, or Squanto, had been kidnapped years earlier and sold into slavery in Europe. When he made his way back home, Squanto could speak a little English and was familiar with European custom.
King, welcome you here. Kana naman kwetatawa wasanesa ogiyu.
This is one of the very first of these treaty encounters that are going to become such an important part of Anglo-American relations with Indian peoples across the continent.
We want to be at peace with you. We want you to promise that none of your people will harm any of our people.
Ute, the Kantan, on a Kenya, one of the last be Nino.
Anunas matanan was iao anano.
Let us agree then that if anyone unjustly attack you, then we will help you. And if anyone unjustly attack us, then you will help us.
There was cause for joy on both sides. The Pilgrims had friends to help them navigate the unfamiliar hardships of their new home. The Wampanoag had made themselves the first and favored ally of the new English colony.
There's a very clear sense that Massasoit understands the entire treaty as reciprocal. At the very end of the treaty, it says, if you do these things, then King James will esteem you his friend and ally. So it would make very good sense for the Indians to think this is an alliance. This is a meeting between friends. As soon as the treaty is concluded, that very day, Massasoit says, tomorrow I'll bring my people and we'll plant corn on the other side of the stream. So this sense that, oh, we're the same people now. We're going to be sharing everything.
Over the coming months, the two peoples made halting moves towards codifying their alliance. As a show of friendship, Massasoit formally ceded the settlers the village of Patuxet and all the planting land and hunting grounds around it. In July, Edward Winslow made a 40-mile journey to Massasoit's village, Okanoket, and presented the chief a gift of a copper chain. The Wampanoag agreed to trade with the English alone, and not the French. Massasoit would benefit as the facilitator of trade between the English and other tribes. A few weeks after Winslow's visit, the Pilgrims invited the Wampanoag to take part in their first American Thanksgiving. But what sealed the relationship was a simple show of personal respect. In February of 1623, when a messenger arrived at Plymouth with the news that Massasoit was desperately ill, Winslow, like many Algonquin, rushed to his side.
Winslow makes the point that this is what Indians do. When a friend is sick, everyone congregates at the friend's bedside. This is one of those places where Winslow is acting as he knows Indians expect people to act.
Sentinel, Winslow.
Yes, Massasoit.
Lo que estaba haciendo. Don't be, they don't.
Edward Winslow is a very interesting man. He was the second in command in Plymouth, and he's the one who takes it upon himself to become the principal emissary to Massasoit.
Yes.
Some Indians had a dual chiefdom system. That is, they had an overall chief who is called the inside chief, who is responsible for the community and basically stays within the community. And then there's an outside chief who is responsible for essentially foreign relations and war. Winslow is acting as the outside chief.
Winslow's medicine was of no particular benefit to Massasoit, but the chief did recover, and Winslow was there, representing the entire Plymouth colony, when Massasoit was able to rise again. In spite of a growing trust between Edward Winslow and Massasoit, the relationship between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag remained tentative. The Pilgrims were separatists, devout Christians who had fled the Old World, for fear its corruptions would darken the godly light in which they dwelt. Corrupting influences lurked everywhere. Even Winslow, who found the Wampanoag and other tribes trustworthy, quick of apprehension, and just, fretted about close contact with the Indians.
You see at the beginning of the 17th century, this kind of cautious getting to know one another. As those peoples become more and more dependent on one another and exchange more and more goods and ideas, and people, children, wives, families have more and more contact with one another. In a sense, the two peoples come to share a great deal. The English come to be more like Indians in many ways. They dress more like Indians, they use Indian words, they're familiar with Indian ways, and the Indians come to be more like English. A lot of Indians speak English. They wear English clothes, they build houses that are English. There's a reciprocity of exchange that actually turns out, we might think, oh, how lovely, what a nice multicultural fest that is. But actually, it makes everyone very, very nervous.
The Pilgrims were especially wary. They were badly outnumbered, and many Indians, they believed, bore the English an inveterate malice. They also knew Massasoit had the power to shield them from every danger. So in the spring of 1623, after hearing rumors of a planned attack by the north, the Pilgrims, under their militia leader Miles Standish, made a deadly preemptive raid and returned to Plymouth with an object lesson to those who would cross them. This sudden and unexpected execution had so terrified the Indians, Edward Winslow wrote, that many fled their homes. Living like this on the run, many had fallen sick and died. Shocking and brutal as the raid was, Massasoit counsels his stations to keep up relations with Plymouth. The Wampanoag were still the favored friends of the English. Surely no threat to their friends.
Massasoit was able to keep this peace for a long time, which suggests that it's not simply his personality and his command that's doing that. The nature of native society means that he is representing what the majority of his people want to do.
The Indians wanted certain things from the Europeans: knives, axes, swords, and steel drills.
The Europeans bring things like metal kettles that are very useful for Indian people, and Indian people incorporate those goods into their own cultures on their own terms and in their own ways.
For Native people, trade is about binding people together in relationships of reciprocity. So that was the question: how do we bring the English into these relationships of reciprocity?
Welcome. Time is done. Yes.
We lived right near the shoreline, and we harvested the quahogs, which you make the quahog chowder from, and all the other good things. And then after you eat the contents, when you save the shell, we wasted nothing to create a gauge because everything was a gift. And from the shell, from the quahog, the purple spot is what we made the wampum beads from. All the tribes respected the wampum, and the value that wampum had was spiritual more so than material. We used it in ceremony, it sealed the agreements, it was what notarized the transaction, when wampum was exchanged, no one would break the agreement that went along with the wampum, be a marriage agreement or a treaty or whatever, because it was so sacred and you don't go against the creator.
Initially, the Europeans then will say, well, this must be like silver or gold. This is something that Indian people will use and trade back and forth. So they accept it initially as well. And wampum is seen as Native American currency by the English.
European traders, long familiar with the money economy, set in motion a system for exchanging hard goods for wampum, making the Indians' traditional ceremonial amulet the coin of the American realm. Trade flourished under this ingenious new system. English merchants eagerly awaited Indian furs from the New World. The beaver hat was the fashionable new accessory on the streets of London, and the arrival at Plymouth of product laden ships from England was happy news to all. With the import of steel drills, native tribes could greatly speed the manufacture of wampum.
It's much easier to create a wampum shell, to drill that hole through the center with a steel drill than with a stone drill. And so suddenly there's a large supply of wampum. And what this means is that tribes in the interior who previously had very little access to wampum now are able to get it. And there are also groups that have furs and other things to trade to the Europeans.
Plymouth colonists rely on Massasoit to begin brokering connections with other native groups. So Massasoit becomes this very important node in these regional exchanges among furs and European goods and wampum, all of which are being exchanged many times in different groups, depending on who has what.
With the Pilgrims integrated into the web of his alliances, Massasoit's gamble, welcoming the strangers, seemed to have paid handsome dividends.
I think he would have looked back over the previous decade and thought that he had done some pretty good work. It must have seemed possible to Wampanoags and to other native groups in southern New England to envision a future in which English and native communities could live profitably together.
In the spring of 1630, a fleet of ships led by the Arabella appeared off the coast to the north of Plymouth, carrying 1,000 new immigrants. While the Pilgrims had been escaping Europe, these Puritans meant to recreate a new and more pious England in America. They had embarked from England with a grant from their king to establish the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and with a boundless sense of mission.
In Europe at this time, and particularly among the Christian kingdoms of Europe, there was this belief in the right to go out and usurp land that was not occupied by Christian people. And there's religious basis for this, as well as political, in that this was a God-ordained practice in which one would be spreading Christianity and would be spreading European civilization, and there was a moral obligation to do so.
On board the Arabella, days before it landed, the future governor of the new Massachusetts Bay Colony, John Winthrop, essayed the epic vision. The Lord shall make us a praise and glory, for we must consider that we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us. The Puritans washed into Massachusetts Bay by the thousands in the next 5 years, establishing town after town, their path cleared by new waves of smallpox hitting tribes in New England.
One of the historians of the Puritans, I'm quite sure it was one of the clergymen, said in reference to the death of so many of the Massachusetts people, that the land was almost cleared of those pernicious creatures so as to make way for a better growth. Now he's talking about women, children, all of that, but that's the way they related because their unfounded notion of European superiority. They kept coming one boatload after another.
You had all of these people who are coming over from England with that sense of entitlement. They had this image of the colonies as if there's just great space for them to occupy, and there are great resources that are for the taking.
In less than a generation, Massasoit saw the English population surrounding the Wampanoag rise from 300 to 20,000.
The animals that the English bring with them are incredibly devastating because they just let them run loose. The pigs in particular had apparently no natural enemies here. They would talk about, innumerable numbers of pigs just vacuuming up the acorns and the other things on which native people relied for food, and on which these animals that the native people were accustomed to hunt relied for food.
The population of the English colonies was growing dramatically, with increasing demand to establish new towns, create farms, and expand. The one thing that native people have that the English people want is their land. Access to an acquisition of this so-called free land that the Americas offer is a source of constant and recurrent conflict with Indian people. The English came from a society where land was in short supply. Ownership of land was a mark of status as well as a source of wealth. For Indian people, land is homeland. You are rooted to it by generations of living on the land. Your identity is tied up in it. It's not a commodity to be bought and sold.
Massasoit had not felt pressure to sell land for the first 20 years of Plymouth's existence, and his first commitments to cede territory had seemed harmless. But just as the English became more aggressively acquisitive, Massasoit found himself in a weak bargaining position. The beaver population was badly depleted, collapsing the trade on which his relationship with the Pilgrims had been built, and the English no longer needed Massasoit's help in expanding their commercial reach. So he was forced to bend to his allies' desire to have his land. The chief got what he could for the Wampanoag land. He sold one parcel for 10 fathom of beads and a coat. As time went on, he asked for more. Hatchets, hoes, knives, iron kettles, moose skins, matchlock muskets, yards of cotton, and pounds of English coin.
There are several incidents where Massasoit's clearly disgruntled with the way things are changing. For instance, he agrees to sell some of his land to some of the settlers down in Rhode Island. And they pay him for it, and he says, this is nowhere near enough, and he gives it back. And they refuse to take it. They refuse to take the gifts, the payment back. And they say, you can't return this, and this is a done deal. This land is now ours.
The English were in a race to establish empire in the Americas, jockeying for territory with the French, the Spanish, the Swedish, the Dutch.
They're very expansive, and they don't expand incrementally. They're aware that the Connecticut River is a major conduit of trade. The Dutch are already on the lower end of the river, and so clearly they want to control the Connecticut River from its midsection.
With the influx of English people in the 1630s, Puritan New England ceases to be weak and vulnerable and now becomes a power in the region. As they look further west, they see another major power. The English identify the Pequot as an obstacle to their expansion.
partners, your subjects, whatever it takes, they're frightened.
So that's kind of talking about, which number was it? The 13. The first part of 13 might have been hard to really understand, just because it kind of only glimpses at it very briefly. But basically, they went to war with the Pequot because they were trying to expand, and the Pequot were in their way. And then after the Pequot War, and all those people were just, massacred, basically. All these leaders, including Massasoit, they go to Massachusetts and they're like, hey, we're friends, right? Here's a gift. We're friends. We want to make sure we're still friends. That's what a lot of leaders did after the Pequot War.
Massive amounts of wampum.
Oh my goodness, I just saw your chats. So I'm thinking that as soon as I hit mute, it probably couldn't hear it anymore, right? And I can't hear you, dang it. Type in the chat. But I'm thinking, yeah, okay, there we go. Okay, tell me what's the last thing you heard. I was afraid of that. That's why I didn't hit mute for a long time, but then I started making noise and I didn't want to disturb you as you were watching. Tell me what the last thing is that you watched, and I'll play it back. We're gonna have to pause right now anyways. We'll because class is basically over. We're gonna start from here next week on Tuesday, because remember Monday we don't have school. So Tuesday we will continue right where we're at and finish this video. So make sure you guys turn in anything missing. Kylinda, I need from you the reflection from the posters from yesterday. So I need you to turn that in online or on paper. If you're turning in on paper, that's fine. Bring it into the school so that I can grade that. But other than that, that's it. And we'll see you on Tuesday.
See ya.
Bye.